All right, focus on international stories this half hour. The arrest of the co-founder of Wikileaks, Julian Assange, was splashed across front pages around the globe. He was arrested at the Ecuadorian embassy in London. Assange took refuge in the embassy in 2012 to avoid extradition to Sweden over a sexual assault case that has now been dropped. He now faces US federal conspiracy charges related to one of the largest ever leaks of government documents, government secrets. To discuss this and other international news, we're joined by a Professor of Political Economy at Wits School of Governance, Professor Patrick Bond. Thank you for being with us,
Nice
Patrick.
to be with you, Francis.
So he's been holed up for 7 years. How does it all change now? Ecuador, I'm thinking of the name, was protecting him, and suddenly that's all changed. Why now?
Well, it's particularly, I think, because the team around Assange held a press conference at which they revealed that Ecuador and the United States were doing very, very intrusive spying on Assange. Now, some of Assange's critics say, well, that's exactly what he was doing on the United States.
Yeah.
But this is maybe a new level of particularly violation of his rights as an Ecuadorian citizen. He was actually given citizenship by the predecessor of the current president. His name, Rafael Correa. The current president, who took over a couple of years ago, Lenin Moreno, was initially from the same left-wing movement, but then he got much closer into Mike Pence, who visited him, the highest level visit from an American leader to this small country. I was actually there for a week last year. It is a very disturbing process of what had been a pink wave, a left movement in Latin America, having reversed, and of course Bolsonaro, the Brazilian neo-fascist, being the extreme version. And I think that allows Lenin Moreno to say to the US, we'll find a way to get Assange out. And maybe it's a coincidence, but the IMF just gave Ecuador a major grant, or it'll be a loan they'll have to repay, but $4.3 billion, and that's what they had been negotiating for. So let's say there's some big geopolitics. The US has, since Barack Obama took power, and when Julian Assange began, especially in 2010, leaking, they've really been after him. I mean, the entire weight of the US state has been trying to get him out of there.
So Ecuador took a very bold stance to protect him, but like you say, in response to this, not saying he's our citizen. The whole situation has shifted.
It's very messy and patently illegal for Lenin Moreno to have authorized the British cops to come in yesterday and remove him. And so, of course, his line of argument is he should not be extradited to the US. The US has had this a grand jury that's been empowered to put charges together. They could have any number of charges, but the one they've chosen is revealing. It's the charge that with Chelsea Manning, who used to work in intelligence, military intelligence, they released together 250,000 documents, but it required hacking into the US security system. Now, the US could have been more bold and said, well, we'll get them on all sorts of things like publishing secrets. Yeah. But then they'd also have to do the New York Times, the Guardian, the others that Assange was cooperating with. And there's the question, isn't Julian Assange a journalist who deserves the sorts of protections that we'd all expect, from SABC to ask tough questions, to get the information, to encourage whistleblowers, to open governments, that we open governments being WikiLeaks' motto. I think this was an extraordinary run of journalism. 10 million documents that are on the wikileaks.org website, not a single one forged, in spite of all the people that no doubt were sending him junk. He was able to filter out, and this is an extraordinary stash of information, which even though he's in jail, should be there for a long time.
Okay, so you're on the side of journalistic freedom here, because there is this debate, and yes, maybe hacking is required sometimes to dig up the dirt. So he went in, but what he released was diplomatic discussions about presidents, things that could affect maybe not national security, but certainly diplomatic relations in future.
Oh yes, yeah.
So you're saying this was complete. What he did was right, if you look at it from a journalistic freedom perspective.
Yes, and you'd be the one to judge. I'm an academic, and I'm so grateful, and I think all of my colleagues are, that we have on the record these insider documents. Otherwise, we've just got public relations from the US State Department. But really what he did was expose war crimes. Now, in the process, you could say, well, did he sufficiently dedact or erase the names of people who might have been sort of innocent in all of this. And I think he took great care to do that. And he worked with the New York Times and the Guardian, especially with those State Department cables. He released lots of other bits and pieces. Now the controversies really grow in 2016 because it's the Democratic National Committee, it's Hillary Clinton's main campaign advisor, and her own emails. So yes, at that point, this becomes highly political, and Assange is criticized for having back channels to Donald Trump Jr., Donald Trump's son, who he was trying to probably find a way to get out of this embassy. He'd been there for 4.5 years. And I think that's the potential mistake that many of his allies, his friends would say, well, that kind of back channel to the Trump regime, and look how flimsy Donald Trump is. He 141 times praised WikiLeaks in 2016. Now he says, oh, what are they? I've never heard of them. They're not my thing, he said.
And what do you believe is the motivation behind that? A lot of people commenting on this.
Well, Trump is absolutely torn, isn't he? I mean, you can just see a man who's a massive con man. We'll never forget that this is the most disreputable
Someone
figure.
could hack into his tax
well,
affairs.
you know, and his undergraduate grades, all the things he wants to keep secret. But I think more importantly, you're seeing a president torn between the so-called paleo-conservative, old-fashioned, let's call them America First, and maybe isolationist conservatives, and the neocons. Those are the Bush era who wanted to spread democracy through wars and their own kind of state terror. And I think that sort of U.S. imperialism, on the one hand, was able to win, and they hate Julian Assange. The other right-wing paleocon, they're pretty upset. They say that, oh, the deep state from the United States has gone after him. You can find that in places like InfoWars, one of the right-wing websites that influenced Trump. What a torn man Donald Trump is. But the main thing is that they're trying to get Assange to the U.S. to stand trial. And his main ally in that 2010 hack was Chelsea Manning. She's in jail now in solitary confinement because she wouldn't go to that grand jury and talk about what they'd done. So we're looking now at what happened way back in 2010. Much has happened since then. Assange, in spite of being in this sort of self-imposed exile, of a political refugee status, he really did extraordinarily good work over this period to liberate information, to reveal U.S. imperialism, Russian criminality. You know, he started in Kenya as an investigative reporter on Kenyan corruption, and 2 of his associates were assassinated. So it's quite a career, and we just have to hope it's not the end of a career, maybe a temporary remission.
And you've pointed out that South Africa was actually caught up in this data leak. Just remind us how it related to us.
Of those 10 million documents, 134,000 mention South Africa. Now, it's too much for anyone to go through, but there were some very important historical records of the U.S. State Department in league with apartheid. So those of us who are interested in how we got democracy and the difficult role of getting the US government to switch sides away from apartheid. But then you go into the current era, and I think the most important were probably around how we hosted the World Climate Summit. It was quite crucial in 2011, and because the main State Department manager, Todd Stern, was emailing to Hillary Clinton, he was telling her basically all the things that the US wanted to weaken the World Climate Agreement, ultimately the Paris Climate Accord, such as voluntary instead of binding emissions, no climate debt, all kinds of things that Todd Stern basically bragged about to her. We also learned a little bit about Mo Sheikh, who was having regular meals with the U.S. CIA station chief, and this guy wrote them up and wrote the notes, and so we actually learned a lot more about how Zuma took power from the WikiLeaks leaks.
And
as well.
has it been valuable for us? Because that's always the question. Do you respect secrets, and when do you not respect them?
And it's an era when all of us, we could all be hacked, right? I mean, our
you want to know
accounts,
that you can send an email to someone.
And I think you better end that naive wish. I would have that same wish, Francis, but
it's not true anymore.
The surveillance that the NSA, the National Security Agency, and our own state security agency on our emails is complete. They can pick up phone calls anywhere. They have a big operation in Utah to sort of a data bank, a server that just collects the entire world's discussions. That was partly, we know, because Edward Snowden, who was working in one of the contractors for the CIA, leaked, and it was Julian Assange and his team who got him safely from Hong Kong to Moscow, where he now is in exile. It's that sort of extraordinary period where the cyber war is waged by the big forces, big state agencies, big data. And I'm so glad that we have the likes of Julian Assange and Ed Snowden, Laura Poitras, Glenn Greenwald, who've been out telling us how corporates and imperial powers spy on us.
So Glenn Greenwald is an important journalist, and he's been saying that the UK doesn't respect freedom for the press. What do you think the UK will do, because it now has to weigh up this extradition request? Let's end it there.
Yes, I do think the UK is a sub-imperial and allied imperial power with Washington, and I suspect they'll go ahead with the extradition. It could be that Julian Assange spends the 5 years that's threatened in jail, but there may suddenly be new charges against him. It's a tough time ahead, and we have to stand up. I think if there are protests at US and British embassies and high commissions, we should all be there.
Whether you like Julian Assange or not,
that's right.
Some believe he's not the most savoury character, but it's what this represents, I guess.
It is. I mean, this is really an unprecedented legal attack from a country that purports to be free. I did my PhD, my studies there. This is the moment where US hypocrisy on freedom of expression, freedom of the press is in full view.
Thank you very much. Professor Patrick Bond from the political economy, professor rather of political economy at Wits School of Governance.